Let's get this sports podcast party started, all right?
The JAYREELZ podcast.
What is happening, my good people? Greetings. How are you? How's it going? How's everybody doing out there? What is the latest and greatest? Hope everybody's doing well, feeling fantastic, in excellent spirits, delivering the latest podcast on a day that this country will remember forever. Squeezing a dose of reality and what we enjoy as sports fans simultaneously, as this is the JAYREELZ podcast with your host, JAYREELZ. For my first timers, welcome aboard. And for those who've been banging with me going back to the very beginning, somewhere in the middle or even as early as this past Monday, I welcome you guys and gals back. And when I woke up this morning, went outside to walk the dog, and I looked up to the sky and saw nothing but sunshine. Not a cloud to be found. And I actually saw in the distance the moon, which was still up above, way in the sky. It brought me back to what took place 24 years ago. And I know I've chronicled this in the past on a podcast, I would think somewhere along the 7.5-year journey of this podcast. But as I reflect to think that we're almost a quarter of a century removed from the horror of that day, we all know what happened at the Pentagon. We all know what happened on a field in Pennsylvania, Flight 93. And of course, what took place in Lower Manhattan there by the World Trade Center, which I happen to be in that vicinity. And when I say vicinity, no, not within a mile or a half mile. I was literally 3 blocks from the World Trade Center. And I'll briefly go through it because I know it could take up a lot of time. And although it should give it its just due, I don't want it to be a thing where I'm just going to rush it and then, all right, let's get on to sports, because this is a day that, as long as you are alive and remember it, it is going to be fully ingrained every time this date pops up on the calendar, and that we unfortunately have to relive it and go through it. But because this was one of the more tragic, if not even important days of this country, even though it was based in just catastrophe, tragedy, something that you could never even wrap your head around or even imagine, almost 25 years later. And knowing that I was just blocks away from that, that isn't something that I wear with a badge of honor or look at it like, oh, hey, I was down there. I bring that up only because being that close to what was at the time felt like a movie. Coming out of the subway, and as I made the right, leaving the Fulton Street station and heading to my place of employment at the time, which was One World Financial Center, which I had to pass the formerly known as Twin Towers. And as I look up in the sky and I see papers as I'm getting to the street level, and I see papers flying almost as if somebody was throwing a parade, ticker tape of that fashion. And then I noticed that there was flames coming out of the first building that was hit. I believe it was 8:43 a.m. And I'm coming out of the subway at around 10 to 9. And then as I see the papers and I see the smoke and some flames, because remember, that plane came north-south and I'm going east-west. But then when I asked somebody on the street, I said, what happened? What's going on? They said a plane hit the World Trade Center. And I do have a friend who at the time was in the bureau working in the counterterrorism department. And right off the bat, I knew that it had to be a terrorist attack, because who in their right frame of mind is going to fly a plane into the World Trade Center? And that was a day where I left my apartment and did not have my cell phone with me. It was actually charging on the windowsill in my bedroom. And at that point, I started to leave, break north. I didn't even think to go toward my place of employment. I said, there's no way. And luckily for me, I did do that. And I headed up about 6 blocks north of where the World Trade Center was. Because remember, I was 3 blocks away, so I went 3 blocks north. So you figure 6 blocks. And then just so happened that at 9:03, I believe, or 9:02, whenever it was, where I hear this gigantic boom. It sounded like a bomb went off. And now you just hear the roar of people in the streets, just like, oh, like, what was that? Not knowing that that was the impact of the second plane hitting the South Tower at the World Trade Center. And now I'm standing in front of a building waiting for, at that time, my girlfriend, who worked in this building, like I said, 6 blocks from where not only the World Trade Center, but 7 blocks from where I worked. And again, no cell phone. I don't know what to do, but I figured, I'm just going to wait down here, and I just hope to see her because I couldn't get on a phone or try to call her. And then, I don't know, 15, 20 minutes after that, as I'm trying to look around, there's throngs of people just milling around. And it literally was like a scene in a movie. And then thankfully, my girlfriend came, rushed over to me and just gave me a big giant hug. And she even told me that she saw the plane, the first plane, flying south. Like, hey, like, why is that plane flying? And then the next thing you know, it hits the North Tower. And at that point, we just started to walk up Broadway. And we're trying to get whatever news bits from people that were in cars or TVs that were being displayed inside of electronic stores. And little did we know that both planes, obviously hitting the World Trade Center, and then to find out that a plane that hit the Pentagon, as well as the plane in, forgive me for not remembering the town in Pennsylvania, I should know that. And when you add all this up, by the time I even got to, we couldn't get on the subway at that point because everything was shut down. Thankfully, the buses were still running because by the time I got to 23rd Street, I was able to get an express bus to go to the Bronx, where I resided then, and I still currently reside now. Different place, of course. But I get an express bus, and by the time I got home at 10 to 1, I had 9 voicemail messages waiting for me. And then you turn on the TV, and all you could do is just, you can't even shake your head. You can't even comprehend what had taken place. And then by that point, by the time I got to 14th Street, I believe the first building came down, and then the second one came down. And then, I mean, what more could I say? It's a day that obviously I'll never forget. It's a day that I'm sure every American who is old enough to remember will never forget. And yeah, you turn on the news this morning here locally, and of course you still have the people that are going up reading the names of those who perished that day and the brave souls that went into the building, the firemen, policemen, security guards, etc. I mean, what more can I add? And as long as we are all alive who experienced that, who witnessed it, whether near or far, this is one that this country will be etched in our minds forever. And when you think about how the world was before then, and certainly what it's like after, and just how much we take for granted our lives in general. And of course, with recent events of what's going on, which, not to get all unpack that, with the various mass shootings that have taken place here just over the last week, and not to go into the weeds on that, because again, I'm just trying to keep this to 9/11, but that actually ties in because of just the safety, the security, the scope of what that day meant, and pretty much laid the groundwork for where we are today, and that we're even still miles away when it comes to making sure certain venues, certain places, buildings. I mean, think about this. You had the guy a month and change ago drive from Las Vegas to Manhattan, walk through a plaza with an AR-15, goes into a building targeting the NFL, and even then, the guy still left damage in his wake before turning the gun on himself. I mean, now I understand that's a whole other separate issue, which obviously I'm not going to get into. But when you talk about from that point on, September 11, 2001, and no matter where you go, on this planet. Forget about this country. But no matter where you go, you're being watched. There's surveillance cameras everywhere. And that's the thing that boggles my mind, because the just ignorance and the hubris, I'll even say, of people that feel like they could just have the right to do certain things and feel as if they're not being watched, or just have no care in the world and no regard for human life and things of that nature, where, come on, people, can we at least have a bit of a clue? And I'm not going to try to make this a forum, because I'm going to conclude this right here, but it's one of those things that you just wonder if it's ever going to get any better, because it seems like by the day it's getting worse. And when we look back on the events of 9/11 and how just terrible it was for this country, and a day that we'll never forget, we just only hope that somehow, some way, humanity, people, will have a bit of a clue, get it together, and try to take at least a step forward in progress, in doing the right thing, in being mindful, being aware, being thoughtful, because by the second, it just seems like we're going backwards. And I'll leave it at that. Now, I know it's a tough act to follow, because I'm going literally from the dose of reality to now the toy department of life sports, so I got to switch it up here quick, fast, in a hurry. But I know it's going to be rather difficult, because I'm going to talk about baseball. And if you watched my live stream yesterday, every Wednesday a live stream, 12 noon on YouTube, I have chronicled the utter collapse and the failures of a New York Met team that right now is out to sea with barely a life raft. And I've heard from certain quarters, as I get into the batter's box right now, as I detail people who are trying to remain optimistic. And I understand that the Mets still control their own fate. And now we're down to 16 games of the season, 9 of which are at home. And in the midst of a 5-game losing streak, losers of 6 of their last 7. The Phillies are ready to do what the Mets did to them at Citi Field this year. Now, mind you, that the Mets did take 1 game early this year in June, where they lost 2 out of 3 in Philadelphia. So it's not as if with the Phillies coming to New York, they were 0-6 at Citi Field, where now it looks like the Mets could lose 6 out of 7 down in the city of brotherly love. But what I'm trying to do here is not belabor the fact of epic collapses of years past, of another meltdown by this team, by this organization in big spots. And granted, this team gave us a magic carpet ride last year to an NLCS. And at this very moment, they are literally hanging on for their dear lives by their fingernails. And I'm trying to put a positive spin on this, because with this recent losing streak, they have forgot to hit. They've pitched not so good. And they're playing their final game of this road trip, a 10-game road trip, which I even said weeks ago, check those receipts, and even a week ago this past Monday, where they started off in Detroit and they actually won the first 2 games of that series and of the road trip, where you probably thought, all right, well, hey, if we go in 2 out of 3 in Cincinnati, and all right, even if we split in Philadelphia, I will come home with a 6-4 record. I would take that and sign it in blood. Well, haha, the joke's on me. But for this team that has not hit, and I get it, Juan Soto reached the 30-30 club, the 5th Met player to do so, I could care less. All I'm looking forward to is a win today to salvage not only this series but this road trip, to at least have some good feelings coming home tomorrow, because the final homestand of the year, a 9-game homestand at that, it's not going to be coconuts and palm trees, as I like to say. In fact, you have an old friend that is visiting Citi Field tomorrow, and you don't think he wants to stick it to his former team? That being a one Jacob deGrom? and a Texas Ranger team that now is actually closer to the division than they are to the wild card, I believe, in the American League. Then you have the Padres coming in next week, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, after a much-needed day off because the team hasn't had a day off, I believe, since the 4th of July. I mean, think about it. They're on a 10-game road trip now. Prior to that, they were on a 7-game homestand, so I believe they haven't had a day off in 17, maybe even more than that, 20-some-odd days. So with the Padres, who have the Mets number and no Yu Darvish as of right now, thank God. And then the Nationals, who right now they can't even beat anybody, so why would I think that, the Nationals come to town, they'll win 2 out of 3? And then you close out your season in Chicago against the Cubs, who are trying to hold on to that 4th spot of the wild card, which would be home field for them in the first round. And then they go to Miami, where people can say, all right, well, it's the Marlins. We beat up on them. Oh, did you forget 2 weekends ago they lost 3 out of 4 to the Marlins? And they always seem to be a thorn in the Mets' side. So yeah, how can I remain optimistic with everything that I've just detailed? Past collapses in 07 and 08, I understand that was a million years ago. Mind you, that was against the Marlins, who they conclude their regular season against, so just keep that in mind. Thankfully, it's not at Shea Stadium or Citi Field. Shea Stadium, because in 07, 08, they had those 2 epic collapses then, if you recall. But all I'll say is this, because I could talk about, this could be a podcast unto itself. Here are the pros. The pros are that they have a 2-game lead, not only on the Giants, but also the Reds, who have gained 3 games in the standings after the Mets beat them last Friday night, which they had a 5-game lead on them. Just keep that in mind. So now you have 2 teams that are going to be nipping at their heels going into the weekend. And of course, I'll go through the schedule as to who the Giants and the Reds will play. But for the Mets, the pros, they have a 2-game advantage over those teams. Obviously, they have destiny in their own hands. All right, let's see if they can get out of Philadelphia with a win. Is that out of the realm of possibility? Right now, it's looking that way, but all they need is a measly win. Whether they win 20-19 or 1-0 and escape a bases-loaded jam with no outs, similar to what Edwin Diaz did in the last Met win that they had a week ago tomorrow. So get to Citi Field with a win under your belt, feeling better about yourself, so the home crowd's not going to get at you for every little mistake that you make, because right now you're under the microscope in New York, knowing that you're about to just gag a wild card with 2.5 weeks to go. But again, we're trying to accentuate the positives here, or the pros. And they are a much better team at home, as we know, better home record. And in those 9 games, you can only hope that they put forth at least a 6-3 homestand. Could you just win the series? And that is the other pro. Mets don't need to go on a 7-game winning streak. They don't need to do that. Just win series. Would I like a 7-game winning streak? Absolutely, because that could probably put them well ahead of the wild card and some distance and breathing room to where you can exhale and feel good about going into the wild card round. Now, again, if they get into the wild card round, are you going to feel good about your chances? If they play the Dodgers or the Padres, for that matter, I'll worry about that when we get to it. Because right now, I can't even think about that as a Met fan. But for the next 9 days after today, they do have home cooking. And as we all know, they are 18 games over 500 when it comes to them playing at the friendly confines of Citi Field. Well, on the road, they're 12 games under. So let's see. Can we just get this 1 game today and then go 6-3 at home over the course of the next week and a half? Is that too much to ask? So that's where the pros come in. Now, you got Chicago and Florida after that on the road. But let's see where we're at a week from this coming Monday. And then I'll be able to decipher where we're at. Now, really what it should be is when we get to the podcast this coming Monday, obviously we're going to see where where the Mets stand at that point. But at least I know they still have 6 games, although not going to be easy, San Diego and Washington. But I'll still know and feel a little bit better if they somehow, some way take 2 out of 3 over the Rangers. And that's no guarantee, as you know. But more so when we get to the following Monday, where we can really take a look at this team and say, all right, final road trip, final 6 games, here's where we're at. How's it looking? So those are the pros. The cons are, I've seen this movie before, and sadly, it has not ended well. We could talk about last year, how they had to win that game in Atlanta, and boy, did they really test the Met fans' patience and their heartbeats on that game. The Monday doubleheader, that first game, remember, 3-0 they were losing going into the top of the 8th, where they scored 4 runs. I take that back. They scored 6 runs. And then the Braves in the bottom of the 8th scored 4 runs to make it 7-6. And then Lindor with his heroics hit a 2-run homer to make it 8-7. And Edwin Diaz had to throw almost 40 pitches to secure a save and clinch a playoff berth. So yeah, the Met fan has to sweat a little bit in order to get to that point. And the beads of sweat are starting to come across the brow right about this moment. So the trust factor in this team and the organization on a whole isn't too sturdy right about now. And then you got to think about whether or not they're going to have a successful homestand. Or worse, what if they're 2 games at the same spot here on, what's that date? The 22nd of September? What if the Reds and or Giants are 2 games back going into that final road trip? Well, we'll have to look at the schedules and check, because the Giants, I know, have the Dodgers for 3 this weekend, so go LA, 3 in Arizona, and then 4 in LA after that. So that's why I said when we get to the 22nd, maybe the Giants will be 5 back and we don't have to worry about that. Then we have to deal with the Reds. Now the Reds have a much more easier schedule. They go to Sacramento to play the Athletics over the weekend. And then after that, they go to St. Louis. Easy schedule. Maybe the Cardinals somehow, some way could play spoiler, which we can only hope. Then they host the Cubs for 4. Cubs are still going to try to hold off the Padres for the home field and the wild card in that first round, so that's a good thing. But then they close out with the Pirates in their building, and then they go to Milwaukee, which will have the 1 seed and everything wrapped up, and they're going to have their pitching aligned for the division series. So the Reds have a very easy schedule. So that's why when we get to the 23rd or the 22nd, I'll have a better feel for where we're at that time, which is still plenty of baseball to be played. And with all that being said, I still think they're going to make it to the postseason. I really believe that in my heart of hearts. But I am cautiously optimistic, because as much as I don't want to wait for that other shoe to drop, sadly, I have to brace myself with all the scars that I've had to endure for the last 39 years. From the last time they won a World Series to this very second. I have all of the invisible scars on my body when it comes to, if there is such a thing, that's an oxymoron, isn't it? All of what I've had to endure as a Met fan for the last 39 years, they are cut deep inside of me. So therefore, I am bracing myself. 1 game at a time. And if you want to hear more of a rant, go to the live stream yesterday, because for 25 minutes, I spewed on how this could end up being a colossal failure. Today, I'm actually being kinder. Maybe because of the start, remembering 9/11 and going through those events and what happened that day, and obviously what it means to me, and a little bit somber that I'm not over exuberant, or I'm not ready to pound the Mets or get on them, or just think that the sky is falling and the Mets aren't going to make it, that I'm trying just to be even keel, which is, I think, the proper way and the right way to go at this very moment, because it's so easy to go left and go off the rails than to just stay on track to be like, hey, let's see what happens today in Philadelphia. You come home, whatever. But it's not easy, people. It is not easy. As far as, now I'm going to pivot from there, because I could go off, but I'll leave it there. I don't want to bore you with any more Met material, but obviously they are the focal point of what's happening in baseball here, considering they lost the first 3 games in Philadelphia. Their lead is slipping in the final spot for the wild card in the National League, etc. So otherwise, other things that happened in baseball here over the week, and of course, I'll break down the latest and greatest of what's happening. I know that the Tigers have come into Yankee Stadium and beat the Yankees to a pulp. 23-3, outscored them over these 2 days. 12-2 and 11-1. Not good as they try to salvage that series and then go to Boston for the weekend. So the Yankees, who are in the middle of this 12-game stretch where they won 2 out of 3 against Toronto, and they also won 2 out of 3 in the previous series against the Astros. Now, at worst, it's going to be 2 out of 3, and let's see if they come out on the plus or losing side of the weekend, which would be 500, because to close out the year, they have a cakewalk. They're going to play the Twins, the Orioles twice, and they have another team in between. I know they have a cupcake schedule here down the stretch, so the Yankees are going to be fine. But when it comes to the other wild card, especially in the American League, now that you know what's going on in the National League, you have Yankees and Red Sox are tied, and that could certainly flip, especially as we get into the weekend when those two teams will square off. Then you have the Mariners, who are 3-1 behind both the Yankees and Red Sox, where the Yankees are 4, Red Sox 5. Then you have the Rangers, a game and a half back, but you also have to remember, although I mentioned that they were closer to the Astros in the division, they are not. They're closer to the Mariners, obviously, because they're ahead of them in the wild card. But they are 3 back, 2.5 behind the Astros for the AL West. So you do have to keep them in mind as far as them winning a division. And they do play the Astros, I believe, one more time, and the Mariners as well. So we'll take a look at that once we get to Monday's podcast, as we get now less than 2 weeks out when we reconvene at that time. But you have Seattle, Houston, and then you also have the Guardians, who are 3.5 back, and then the Royals 4 back. So to me, I guess you have to keep the Guardians there, but this is a battle of Mariners, Rangers for that last spot, and maybe the Guardians if they make a last push here to see who's going to get that 6th seed in the American League. And the National League, you already know. I'm not even going to include Arizona. I know they're 3.5 back and 4 behind the Mets in a loss. And then the Cardinals are 5 back, 4.5. I'm not going to include them. Right now, to me, it's Mets, Giants, Reds for that final spot. And as far as the divisions go, Blue Jays have a 3-game lead on both the Yankees and Red Sox. We know the Central's done. Same for the NL East as the Phillies, who have now just put the Mets out to pasture for the division. They're 10 up. And the Brewers are going to win the Central as well. And the Dodgers have a 3-game lead over the Padres, who the Padres have not played well. They've lost 7 of their last 10, including getting swept, as you know, by the Orioles and teams like that, that they have certainly thumbed their nose against the inferior competition. So let's see if they're going to make any push to the Dodgers, as the Dodgers now go to the Bay Area to play the Giants over the weekend, which is enormous. And let me get to the schedule right now as we take a look. The key matchups here over the weekend. Now today we know that Yankees, Tigers, Kansas City, Cleveland, as they wrap up that 4-game series. And yesterday, I believe Kansas City did win, as Cleveland won the first 2 games of that series. Let me just double check that. I believe Cleveland did win the first 2 games. Let me not say this out of school. Kansas City, yeah, Cleveland won 10-2, and then they also won 3-0, or 2-0, excuse me. So let's see if Cleveland could win 3 out of 4 and put the Royals out of their misery, quite frankly, in the wild card chase. But as far as the weekend goes, well, let me see, the rest of Thursday, Houston at Toronto, where Houston lost a brutal game there the other night. They did win yesterday, but had a 3-1 lead in the 9th inning, and then they tied it, where I believe George Springer had a 2-run home, and then they won in the 10th. And then, well, Colorado's playing San Diego for 4 after the Dodgers swept them. So I'm sure if the Padres are going to try to get closer to the Dodgers in the division, with Colorado coming to town, that is certainly the cure of all ills. But as far as the weekend overall, here's what you got. And the series that matter were teams that are in the hunt. Tampa Bay at Chicago, Cubs that is. Kansas City at Philly. Baltimore, Toronto. Chicago, White Sox at Cleveland. Detroit at Miami, because remember, Detroit and Toronto, they're going neck and neck, and I believe Detroit right now has the 1 seed in the American League, so you got to keep that in mind. Yankees, Red Sox, Rangers, Mets, Houston at Atlanta, Cincinnati at the Athletics, as I detailed earlier, and then LA at San Francisco. And then the Angels are in Seattle. Also got to keep that in mind. So you have a lot of interesting series. A lot of good series here as you head into the weekend. You know I'll be abreast of it. I'll keep on top of it as we will reconvene there, as I mentioned on Monday, and rehash and see where we are, especially in that National League wildcard. Now, a couple other things. I know Trey Turner with his hamstring is going to be out, maybe back by the playoffs. That's your leadoff hitter, so that's actually a big loss to their offense. And with hamstrings, you know, they're finicky, so we'll see what happens there. Bo Bichette on the 10-day IL with a sprained left knee. The leader in hits in the American League, maybe in all of baseball for that matter. So that's another big injury. Let's see how Toronto plays that out here throughout the course of the next week and a half. And then you had Aroldis Chapman with that crazy stat where he had not given up a hit since July 23rd. He actually has faced 50 batters up until yesterday where he gave up a base hit and had retired his previous 50 batters. And Chapman, I don't know, fountain of youth. We thought that he's certainly on the back nine of his career, but at the 18th hole, right now he's looking at it as if he's at the 12th hole at 37 years of age. So he's had a big time year for the Red Sox, but he finally gave up a hit yesterday, the third longest streak of such, where in 17 appearances he didn't give up a hit. 2 other pitchers, including Tim Burdack of the Mets, was one. I found that very surprising. And then you have Anthony Rizzo, who retired as he signed a 1-day contract with the Cubs. We all know lifetime Cub, was with the Yankees just recently, as you know, but retired, goes off into the sunset. So congratulations to him on a great career and much success and all the best to him in his next endeavor and next chapter of life. All right, now let me put on the helmet and shoulder pads, go through the NFL. We'll check on a week 2 and a couple other things on top of that, as well as the college schedule. As far as football, the highlight game of the weekend by far. And tonight you do have Washington Green Bay to kick us off on Amazon. Good game. Let's see if Green Bay go off 2-0, which would be good. First 2 games at home, which means that they have, out of remaining 15 games after this, 9 are on the road. So you got to keep that in mind if you're a Packer fan, because remember the unbalanced schedule, or inbound schedule, they have, the NFC has the 9 road games. So you have to take that into consideration. But with Washington Green Bay tonight, but the big game and the one I want to talk about, which I understand, we saw this in February and we saw it 2 years ago, and now we got to see it again. The Eagles go to Kansas City, 4:25 on Fox, Super Bowl rematch, to where the Chiefs, who had lost their opening game in Sao Paulo, then you have the scenario where no Xavier Worthy, or the likelihood of Worthy being out, where Travis Kelce admitted that it was his fault bumping into him early on in that game against the Chargers. And now you have to wonder whether or not the Chiefs, although I'm sure they're going to be stoked, fan base, etc., but they could be in danger of going 0-2. Now, what does that mean in the grand scheme of things? Absolutely nothing, because the following week they got to go to MetLife to play the Giants, and who knows what the Giants are going to look like as they go to Dallas on Sunday with Russell Wilson, and with the Jackson Dart Watch already on and in full bloom. How Wilson plays there on Sunday could be big as to whether or not Dart does get a start as the backup quarterback on this Giant team, to whether or not he's going to be thrown right in the mix, and that is a Sunday night game. So imagine that. Here it is, your, at least what's deemed to be the future of the franchise. If Russell Wilson does not have a game where he is productive, or at least keeps his team in the game, where you could have Dart penciled into the starting lineup and under center against the defending AFC champs and Patrick Mahomes, and dare I even say, if the Chiefs go 0-2, how Dart is going to be asked to pull his team out of the fire and at least be competitive, if not embarrassed, against a Chiefs team that is staring at an 0-2 deficit. So that's why I tie that all in. And how I look at it is, it's not as if the Eagles lit the world on fire there in that opening game against the Cowboys, but I'm sure they're going to do what they do best. And remember, they played on a Monday night 2 years ago where they left Arrowhead with a win, and they could have lost the game because remember, Marquez Valdez-Scantling dropped the ball at the goal line, which was a catch that he should have caught, and the Chiefs would have won, but that happened to be the beginning of the end for the Chiefs that year because after that, they were 10-1, and I believe they concluded the year losing 6 of 7, including that playoff game in Tampa where they got embarrassed. So it's not as if they're not going to be privy, or I should say privy. It's not as if they're going in there knowing that it's not going to be a hostile environment, and they know what it takes to play there. And of course, Andy Reid, who was well-known or well-versed in knowing about that Eagle team, obviously they think there's going to be revenge on their minds. Now, of course, a regular season game as opposed to winning a championship, you can't even equate. But I know there's going to be a revenge factor knowing that they got embarrassed. They were down 34-0 in the game before they lost 40-22. So all that factors in, you would think the Chiefs could come out on top. But boy, that would be a statement if Philadelphia goes in there and beats them, whether they win by 1 or by 50. So obviously a lot of eyes are going to be on Arrowhead to see how the Chiefs respond not only to the Super Bowl, and again, that was just 2 games ago when you think about it. I understand it's separated by 7+ months, but it's not as if this game is week 9, week 10, where, we're well removed from the Super Bowl. The season just started, and you have the 2 Super Bowl participants matching up against one another, where, like I said, they just played 2 games ago. So that is the marquee game, which I'm looking forward to. Fascinated to see how it's going to take shape on whether or not the Chiefs are going to answer the bell and get to 500, or are the Eagles going to put it on them similar to what you saw there in the Super Bowl, maybe not to the extent of 40-22, but who knows? So we'll certainly be witnesses to that there on Sunday. And as far as the rest of the slate, Jacksonville, Cincinnati, let's see how the Jaguars respond after their opening win against the Carolina Panthers. And the Bengals, although weren't world beaters against the Browns, but you win a division game on the road, you certainly don't throw it back. So let's see how to me, that's going to be a game more about the Jaguars, because if they get blown out 38-10, you're going to be, all right, well, no surprise there. But if they lose a close game 27-24, or dare I even say win a close game 27-24, you're going to be, all right, well, maybe Jacksonville is a team that we're going to have to look out for. So that's why that game has some significance. Chicago at Detroit. This is another low-key, big-time game because this is the return, the homecoming of Ben Johnson. The Lions home opener. Lions did not play well in Green Bay, as you know. And then the Monday night game, which obviously we didn't cover, but you had a 17-6 lead in your building in the fourth quarter, and J.J. McCarthy did not have a good first half and did not play well. And then all of a sudden, he looked like Joe Montana, where the Bear defense just fell flat on their face. Caleb Williams certainly did not make anybody feel good at Soldier Field that, hey, can we really trust this guy to lead us to the promised land, to be our quarterback, not only just of the future, but also of the present. And with Ben Johnson having to go there in his first road game against his former team, coach mates, you want to call that, teammates, etc., that could be a tall order for this team. So I think this game is more, you can say more for Chicago, but more for Detroit, because even if they win a close game, people are going to be wondering, and a lot of people are wondering, whether or not that this Lion team, who's had 2 good, successful years, can they make it the third time being the charm as far as a team that could be a powerhouse in the NFC. And again, similar to the Cincinnati, if they win 38-17, you're going to be, all right, and the Lions I'm referring to, great. But if they win a nail-biter, you're going to think, whoa, the Lions aren't clicking. Maybe Chicago has something. Who knows? So to me, that's another low-key big game. Rams-Titans. Dolphins-Patriots in Miami. I mean, the Dolphins were awful in Indianapolis, so who knows? And New England obviously did not play well in their opening game against the Raiders. Now, San Francisco, New Orleans. Here's the thing where if you're a Niner fan, you have to wonder. George Kittle's going to be out on the injury reserve for 4 weeks, hamstring issue. So you may not even see him for longer than that, but he's got to sit out for at least 4. Brock Purdy could be a guy that may not play here in week 2. In fact, the coach Kyle Shanahan said it's a long shot. But it's not even just this week. It could be multiple weeks where he has a toe and a left shoulder strain or shoulder injury. So you may not have your all-pro tight end and your quarterback. So now you're going to be scuffling to see what you're going to do to try to piecemeal it together, to pick up the pieces to see if you could go to New Orleans, who a lot of people think could be the worst team in the league, and see if you could come out victorious. Now, you could probably have me at quarterback there and still be successful, at least for one game there, down at the Superdome. But the Niners, who a lot of people think that they could have a big year, if they're not going to have their tight end for a considerable amount of time, that's a big loss, but I'm sure they manage. And I'm not trying to make Brock Purdy out to be Joe Montana, but if you're not going to have your starting quarterback, that's not going to look good either for multiple weeks at a time. So that's something that we're going to have to see, a developing story, whether or not Purdy plays. Again, it's a long shot, but I'm sure they don't want to risk his health any further if he does get hurt in this game, and then who knows, he could be out for the year. So that's one to look out for. Obviously not a sexy game, not a big game, but if Purdy does play, or if he doesn't, that's one you're going to look at and say, uh-oh, could this be a situation where the Niners could falter here in this early part of the season? So we'll have to keep that in mind. Buffalo at the Jets. Seattle at Pittsburgh. Cleveland at Baltimore, as Baltimore tries to get themselves out of that just utter disaster of Sunday night. Buffalo, the Jets. Let's see if Justin Fields could piggyback off his performance in week 1 against Pittsburgh. Denver at Indianapolis. Nah. Carolina, Arizona. The Sunday night game I do not like. Atlanta, Minnesota. Do not. And I don't want to hear, Kirk Cousins. I mean, obviously, Michael Penix is your starter, but yeah. And we saw this last year when they went to Minnesota, Atlanta, and they lost. So, and then you have your Monday night doubleheader, which I can't stand either. Tampa at Houston at 7 o'clock. And then LA at Vegas, the Chargers that is. All right, 2-1-0 teams. Someone's going to come out 2-0, at least so we think. Hopefully no tie. But the game's at 10 o'clock. So for those of you on the East Coast, you're going to have to stay up till at least 1 in the morning to watch that second game. And I hate the doubleheaders. You know, I've talked about it a million times, ad nauseum. I hate the doubleheader if it was 7 and 8 o'clock or 8:15. I'd still hate it. Because you want to concentrate on one game. You don't want to flip-flop. But that's it. They got to feed these mouths. And I would think, because the game is on ABC, ESPN, Tampa, and Houston, that has to be Buck and Aikman. Because they're not doing a 10 o'clock game. I think that's your Louis Riddick. I don't even know who does the play-by-play. Steve Levy, I couldn't even tell you. So that's what you have with the schedule. And as far as other news and notes, we talked about Brian Daboll sticking with Russell Wilson, what's happening in San Francisco. I know the Steelers signed Jabril Peppers, who got cut by New England, and with Deshaun Elliott having that knee injury there against the Jets, he's going to replace him. So hopefully he'll have a third life, because I know he's bounced around here, Browns, Giants, and then now after New England with another lease on life. Hopefully he steps up and fills in nicely for Deshaun Elliott, as week 2 is pretty much here with the game tonight in Green Bay with the Commanders and Packers. Now, as far as the college football goes, you have a better schedule this week than last week. That I can promise you. The highlight game at 3:30, which I know everybody's going to look forward to, Georgia at Tennessee. Georgia ranked 6th, Tennessee 15th. So the Volunteers, let's see how they do at home against the Bulldogs. By far the best game of the day. But you do have a couple other games that you could keep your eyes out for. More so later on. I mean, Oregon and Northwestern, I don't think so. Clemson and Georgia Tech. Listen, can Georgia Tech pull off an upset? Maybe a little bit better than what we've come to know of them. But Clemson, you would think that they should be fine. Oklahoma going to Temple after them beating Michigan the other day. Wisconsin at Alabama. Central Michigan playing at Michigan. But the other big games of note, obviously outside of the Bulldogs and Volunteers, you have to go to a night where you'll have Notre Dame in a contest against Texas A&M. A&M right now 16th. If they win, they will probably propel themselves into the top or close to the top 12. And I understand it's way early to start talking about where they could fall as far as the college football playoff goes. But that is the big game there, NBC at night. Then you have Florida LSU, which Florida losing to South Florida. That obviously puts a dent into that. But you do have South Florida going to Miami. And that is a game that is on, weirdly, the CW network, which is Channel 11 locally here in New York. But South Florida is now ranked 18th in the country with their wins over Boise State and Florida. And now they go south to Miami to see how they stack up against the Hurricanes. That's actually a decent game right now. Now, do you expect a lot out of South Florida considering what they've done here to start? I mean, maybe not, because the Hurricanes now are a bigger step in class, but at least it's something that will attract your eyeballs somewhere in the, 6:30 hour, maybe after Georgia, Tennessee. If you think, oh, wait a minute, what's happening with the Miami game? And who knows, it may be 42-6 at that point, maybe not. But at least it's something that will be the bridge from Georgia, Tennessee to the night game there with Notre Dame and Texas A&M. So at least you got that going for you in the late afternoon into the evening, and then nothing after that as far as games of note. So Texas A&M, Notre Dame, obviously Georgia, Tennessee. You want to say Florida, LSU, all right, for SEC purposes, and then obviously you have the finale there with the Bulls of South Florida going up against the Hurricanes down at Hard Rock Stadium. So that is your college football there for week number 3. Now let me turn my attention as I lace up the high tops and the hardwood as I start going on that court and you hear the sneakers squeaking. Well, maybe not. But a new NBA rule has come down where when I first heard it, I thought to myself, all right, that sounds pretty good. But then I thought to myself, I said, wait a minute. But what happens if the shot is made? And you're probably saying to yourself, JAYREELZ, what the hell are you talking about? Well, the NBA has instituted a rule that the buzzer beater at the end of quarters, where a lot of players won't take because they don't want to mess up their shooting percentages, and I can understand that. If it's 1.1 second to go in the quarter and you're inbounding from underneath the basket and you get the ball at the free throw line, you're not going to heave a 70-foot three-pointer, especially if you're down by 15 or even up by 15. They're just going to let the clock run out and that's that. Well, now the rule is that the buzzer beater won't count toward the player if he takes that shot, whether it be from 93 feet, 73 feet, 53, or even 33 for that matter. And 33, there's a lot of players in the NBA that can make a 33-foot three-pointer. I get that. But now it's going to count toward the team as opposed to the player. So let's say if somebody was shooting the lights out from 3 and now they got the ball and it's like, oh, well, I'm not going to shoot this because it's going to upset my shooting percentage. Well, now they could do so. But here's the problem with that. So let's say the player makes the basket. The player's not going to get credit for that. The team will. And I'm sure the player's going to say, well, hey, I was really 8 for 11 from 3 as opposed to 7 for 10 from 3. And you know what? They have a legitimate gripe. Now, we have to see an inordinate amount of long half-court or 2/3 or 3/4 shot making ability in order for this to really stick. But that's why I look at it and say, all right, and the likelihood of them making those long shots are slim to none. Unless you're Peyton Pritchard or even Josh Giddey. And Giddey, who had that big shot against the Lakers, that half quarter that won the game, he just re-upped with the Bulls 4 years, $100 million. But for those who make it that shot, whether you are Steph Curry or whether you are the 12th man on the team that is closing out the quarter, I'm sure they're going to say, hey, that should count as 1-for-1 for me and not just the team. So until you start players coming out and saying that, maybe they'll look at it, which I think would be stupid because it should be one or the other. It shouldn't be a thing where if the player misses a shot, all right, it's a team record. Or if the player makes a shot, it's the team and the player. I mean, so yeah, make it make sense. But let's just say if the player does attempt it and they're 10 for 10 from 3 and they're working on perfection, or 5 for 5 from 3 in the first quarter and they're working on perfection, and if they take that 3 with 0.2 seconds to go in the quarter and they miss it, it's not going to count toward the player's record. So you got that. Now, as far as the WNBA, the playoffs begin on Sunday. But because today's the last day of the regular season, the matchups aren't set just yet because you still have quite a few games to be played tonight. Now, I'm not going to go through the schedule. I could go through the standings because you already have the 8 teams that have clinched the playoffs, and that is as follows. Minnesota the 1, Atlanta the 2. Obviously, these are the seedings. The Las Vegas Aces, the Mercury, Liberty, Fever, Valkyries of Golden State, and the Seattle Storm. Now, I'm sure it goes 1-8, 2-7, 3-6, 4-5, and so on. But I can't even match up because if the Liberty win tonight, and I believe Phoenix is playing as well, the Liberty are playing in Chicago. In Chicago, they're long gone. They're actually 10-33, so you would think that the Liberty should win. But if they win and let's say Phoenix plays tonight and they lose, and let me just make sure that, yes, they do have a game tonight, then I believe that the Liberty, based on tiebreaker, chances are they'll have the home court against Phoenix in the first round. So I can't sit here to say who I think is going to win. And it's not as if I've been watching these games. I've been following these teams from afar. But how I'll look at this quote-unquote WNBA preview is this way. The Aces have won 15 straight and have as good as a shot to win a title. Now, prior to the Liberty winning last year, they won back-to-back WNBA championships. I think, even with the Lynx and how they performed here, and the Lynx down the stretch have been mediocre. They've been 5-5, or average, we'll say. So maybe they put the foot off the pedal to the metal, knowing that they clinched the 1 seed and now they can kind of rest up and take it easy. But the storylines going in, how I look at it is, will the Aces continue this role to get to an NBA final? And as a 3 seed, they will not see the Aces until the final because it'll be 1-8, 4-5, then 2-7, 3-6 would be that bracket. And the Dream are playing well. The Dream right now, they have the 2 seed, and that would be an interesting semifinal with those 2 teams going at it, at least I would think. But the Lynx, the way they played all year, to me, it's their championship to lose. Now, I understand you may hear a faction of people out in Brooklyn and the tri-state area that the Liberty will have a shot only because if they're healthy and whole with Breonna Stewart, Sabrina Ionescu, and the like, I'm sure they're going to say, well, wait, we're the defending champs. We could certainly make a run here, beat Phoenix, whether they are hosting in the first round or having to go on the road. And let me just make sure. Yeah, no other team could catch them. So, yeah, and I don't know about Indiana. There's no Caitlin Clark. She's going to be done for the rest of the year, so that's going to be tough. Not only for the sport, because that would only enhance the playoffs even more if Caitlin Clark was in the lineup, but you're not going to have that. So, therefore, who knows if the Fever are going to have any length into this postseason as it is right now, as it stands. They'll have to play Las Vegas. And let me see, Las Vegas. Yeah, they could catch the Dream. Now, I don't know what the tiebreaker scenario is, and I would think that if there is a tiebreaker, if the Vegas Aces have it, they would be the 2 seed and Atlanta would be the 3. So that's why there are no matchups set up for Sunday's opener of the postseason. But all I'll say is this, in closing, I think the teams that can win the final, obviously the Lynx, I got to say the Dream, Las Vegas, I'll say the Liberty only because they are the defending champ. Phoenix, and listen, I haven't watched, I guess I got to throw them in the ring because I can't vehemently say that, oh no, I can't see Phoenix going. It's probably those top 5 teams. Indiana without Caitlin Clark, I'd say no. The Valkyries, I know this is their first year of existence. Not that that means anything because they made the playoffs, but I don't know. Are they going to have any length, whether they play against Atlanta or the Vegas Aces in the first round? Probably not. And Seattle's an 8 seed playing against Minnesota, so no. So I think the bottom 3 teams, no, and any one of those top 5 teams, but I would think it's going to be Minnesota, and I think Vegas will probably be the favorites if I was a betting man to win the whole thing in that order. Maybe the Liberty 3rd, maybe Atlanta 4th, and then Phoenix 5th. Now, Phoenix has a home field or the home court. Does that mean it's better for them? Maybe, but we'll see how it shakes down game 1. And I believe all of the teams will play on Sunday because they're going to have pretty much like the NBA in the opening round of their playoffs when they play the 1 o'clock, 3 o'clock, 5:30, and 8, or 3, 5:30, 8, and 10:30. So Sunday, you're going to have a scenario where it's 1 o'clock, 3 o'clock on ABC, 8 o'clock, and 10 o'clock. And all those games will be on ABC, ESPN, but the 3 o'clock game on ABC. And I would think that's probably going to be maybe the Aces, maybe the Liberty and Mercury. I don't know. I couldn't even tell you. That's how much of a novice I am when it comes to the WNBA. So I'll be on top of it. We'll rehash it a little bit there on Monday to see where we're at when it comes to this postseason for the women's game there on the hardwood. I was going to say hard court or hard court too. All right, now 2 more things before I sign off. As I lace up the skates, training camps in the NHL, I believe they open as early as Monday because the season opens 3 weeks from this coming Tuesday. And you have a player, big-time scorer in the National Hockey League, who turned down the biggest contract in the sports history that has been presented to him. And no, it's not who you think. It is not Connor McDavid, but he in a moment. The Minnesota Wild have a goal scorer, and a top one at that, by the name of Kirill Kaprizov. So the Wild and their GM, who I believe is Billy Guerin, the former Devil, Penguin, won Stanley Cups in the past, had offered Kaprizov an 8-year, $128 million deal to where he and his representatives turned it down. Now, I would think that he's going into the final year of his contract. Therefore, they're bringing this to his attention now prior to the start of training camp to make sure that they put forth this contract to make sure he could sign on the dotted line, and away we go. But he turned it down. Is he looking for greener pastures? Does he want to get to a bigger city, a better opportunity to win a Stanley Cup? Well, based on him putting the thumbs down to that contract, I would think, yeah, no duh. But now when I think about the bigger picture, because the first thing I thought of when Kaprizov turned this down, I said to myself, how do the higher-ups, the front office, the brass that is the Edmonton Oilers, how do you think their club sandwiches and their bottle of spring water and their little Lay's potato chips went down when they heard the news that Kaprizov turned down that contract? Knowing that they could give 8 years and maybe a penny more to Connor McDavid and talk about sweat on their brow, like me as a Met fan trying to sweat out this wild card race. How do you think they feel about hearing Kaprizov turn that down when they're going to have to present a contract to Connor McDavid, the best player in the sport, even though he didn't win the MVP last year? But let's face it, the guy is the creme de la creme. I'm sure they were choking on those potato chips and the spring water went flying when they found out that Kaprizov said, I am not signing the richest contract in NHL history. Just keep that in mind. Keep that receipt. And I don't know. The max is 8 years. It's not as if they could give McDavid $200 million. And McDavid going into the final year of his contract, and all's been quiet on that front ever since they lost Game 6 of the Stanley Cup Final, and the press conference and everything that he said at that time, saying that he's in no rush to sign a contract. That is one we're going to have to monitor here from here on out. Not just Kaprizov, because, yeah, he's an excellent player. Goal scorer, sniper, etc. But we're talking about Connor McDavid. And I talked about that early on this summer. And now, after seeing that, I can't even imagine what the GM, owner, president, etc., and even worse, what the fan base is feeling like yesterday afternoon into the evening, and certainly this morning, as I'm sure the Cheerios isn't going down rather smoothly. And then lastly, as I get into the boxing ring and lace up the gloves there, you have a super middleweight title fight Saturday night, I believe in Vegas, because with these fights, they're all over the place. But you have two guys that are certainly worth their weight in boxing. Canelo Alvarez, Terence Crawford, and I'm sure today will be the weigh-in. But there has been no publicity, that is, no love for this fight. And understand, we now live in an MMA world where boxing is literally drifting out to sea for many reasons. But this is one that if this was even 15 years ago, people will be pumped up. People will be geeked. And I'm sure the die-in-the-wool boxing fan who's not willing to let go of the sport, or the real good sports fan is saying, oh, wow, Canelo and Crawford, I think I may check that out. Because to the good sports fan, the average sports fan, or even the casual sports fan, they wouldn't know who Terence Crawford is. They fell on him. And here's a guy that's 41-0 with 31 knockouts. And Canelo, his name speaks for itself. But not to say that I'm here to break out the pom-poms to say, oh, you got to watch this fight, people, because boxing you cannot trust. And certainly I'm not thinking you're going to drop whatever it is. The pay-per-views back then were $49.95 in my day, where now they're probably $100, which is, I mean, it's a travesty, as we all know. But I'm going to watch this fight Saturday night. I know I've said that in the past. I know with the MMA bout, what was it, almost a month ago, when, was it Dustin Poirier? I should know this off the top of my head. Fought in his last fight, but I went to a wedding. I came back late. I didn't get to watch it. I did see highlights and all that and presented it to you guys and gals. But I will watch this fight, start to finish, and talk about it. Oh, I hope it's a good fight. I hope it's not going to be a waste of my time. But with boxing literally on its last legs, and you could only hope that this is a great fight, which could lead to maybe a second fight somewhere down the road, maybe that first Saturday in May, because we know boxing usually it's around this time, because it makes me think about September 18th, 1999, De La Hoya Trinidad. How could anybody forget that fight? Not that it was a classic fight or an all-time great by any means, but we know how the decision ended up that night, where De La Hoya, I thought, was going to win the fight, but he danced around the last few rounds, and next thing you know, Felix Trinidad was your winner. And it was like, what? And I'll never forget, I was in the bathroom at that time, watching it at a friend's house in Brooklyn, and I said, this fight's over, let me go take a leak. And then when you hear the decision that Trinidad won, Felix Trinidad, of course, I was in shock. Couldn't believe it. And that's the sad part about boxing, because you could get one of those, and hopefully you don't get that result there Saturday night. So, yeah, not a lot of pub, because people don't care about boxing anymore. And take it from me, I'm not watching these fights. The Alexander Usyk, Tyson Furies, who cares? It is a shell. It's not even a shell, it's a carcass. And I hate to kind of use that term, but the sport is roadkill. If it has a pulse, and it does with this fight, but like I said, there's been no publicity. You would think there'd be some buildup. And I'm all over sports, as you know. To me, I've seen nary a word or any buzz, intrigue, you name it. And it just goes to show you where the sport is in 2025. Because these two guys, who are very known fighters, and everybody knows who Canelo is, and Terence Crawford for that matter too, I understand he may not be on everybody's radar, but when you look at his track record, you're going to say, oh, all right. And granted, not that he's fought the best of the best. The first guy that comes to mind is Errol Spence Jr., and listen, nobody's going to confuse Errol Spence with Marvin Hagler, but my point is that you do have a bout that if this was 15 years ago, and let me not even go back to the 80s and 90s, you're trying to get your $5 together and get 10 guys to pay the $50 to go to someone's house, or someone that had the illegal box with the button in the back, so you could say, all right, we're watching a fight. And tomorrow night is one of those nights. Although, in this day and age, nobody's even thinking about that fight. And that's why I'm bringing it up, because I'm going to talk about it on Monday. Because this is a sports podcast. And it's what I do. So, I can only hope it's a good fight, because if it's anything less, then boxing is going to get another black eye, and it's going to be one less pulse and one less breath for a sport that, if it isn't dying or if it isn't dead, it's certainly dying. That'll do it, my good people. Another episode in the books. As always, thank you so much for passing by, carving out precious time out of your day to listen to what it is I have to say about what goes on in the toy department of life called sports. And I know I got off to a little somber start, had to on this day. But whatever it is that you do today moving forward, just enjoy it, enjoy your life, have a great time, enjoy all the sports in that toy department, as we discuss each and every time out when I record these podcasts. And if you haven't done so, please subscribe on YouTube at JAYREELZ. Please, people, I implore you to do so. This little engine that could is trying to get to 1,000 subscribers to start to monetize, to start to really get this on and popping. And on top of that, check the link below in the description. I'm going to host 2 games this weekend, 1 baseball, 1 football. Tomorrow night, 7 o'clock, Rangers Mets, Jacob deGrom, as I mentioned earlier, his homecoming of sorts. And then Sunday, Seahawks Steelers. I'm going to watch those games live, and you can watch them with me. So click on that link below, 7 o'clock, Friday night, tomorrow night, or depending on where you're watching this. And then Sunday, 1 o'clock for Seahawks Steelers. If you could do that, subscribe there or follow there. And there's going to be a lot of baseball to come, especially if the Mets make it to the postseason. I'm going to live stream those games. So please keep yourself locked on YouTube and live on assist.com with the JAYREELZ attachment at the end. I would sincerely and gratefully appreciate it. And if you want to hit me up with a question, comment, suggestion, you could do so at the following. Of course, on YouTube at JAYREELZ, Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, the JAYREELZ Podcast, or on Instagram at JAYREELZ. Twitter, JAYREELZ1 after just a number. And the old-fashioned way to JAYREELZpodcast at gmail.com. I'll be more than happy to follow up whatever questions, comments, or suggestions that you may have, because whether you do or do not know, this is what I love to do, people. In the blood, in the DNA, since birth. As long as I'm sitting in front of this camera and microphone, I will continue to deliver nothing but passion, fire, energy, fury with my thoughts, opinions, critiques, praise, analysis, feelings on anything and everything that happens on the world of the diamond, ice, gridiron, hardwood, golf course, racetrack, tennis court, boxing ring, octagon, you name it. From my lips to your ears, from my heart to your soul, from where I am to wherever you are, the JAYREELZ Podcast always comes correct, direct, and in full effect. From the South Bronx to South Beach to South Central to South Pacific and all points beyond. Peace, love, and God bless everybody. And until next time on the JAYREELZ Podcast, on the flip, baby.